Now it's time to move on to Lesson 3. In Lesson 3, we're going to insert a ninja and a mime flying through the streets of San Francisco. The mime and the ninja were both filmed on blue screen, so we're going to look a little bit at Primack here, which is Commotion's blue screening software. We're also going to go through the basics of rotoscoping and creating track mats for an object. First off, we want to import our elements. Click in the Finder, highlight our 3 elements, and drag them into the project bin. We want to create our comp based on the settings of downtown.mov, so we'll select that movie, go to Composite, make Composite. As we've explained before, Comp 1 will take on the resolution, the frame rate, and also the frame duration of the clip which we did the make composite from. Now that we have downtown.mov loaded into the timeline and in its own comp, we're going to take a look at it. So let's double click on the movie and click on this button right here, which will load the clip into RAM. Now that we've got our clip loaded into memory, we can view it at real time. I'll just hit the play button. Notice that there is a slight dolly or zoom in at the beginning of the shot, which will cause a few issues later on in the demo, but nothing that Commotion can't handle. Now that we're done viewing our clip, we'll go ahead and stop it and close our clip window and go back to our comp, which is Comp 1. The first piece of footage that we want to add is the Mime movie. Making sure that we're at frame 50 in the timeline, we'll go up and drag the Mime movie from the project bin into the timeline. Let's make sure to put it on top of the downtown.mov. Now you can see that the Mime movie is full frame at frame 50. If we use the Z key to go back a frame, it disappears. That's because we inserted it beginning at frame 50, so it only occupies the space and time after that frame. First thing that we want to do, as we did with the downtown clip, is double click on the Mime movie to open it in the clip player. Zoom out on it, make it a little easier to look at, and load it into RAM. Now, starting at about frame 40, we notice some dark blue spots appearing above the mime's head due to the color variations in the blue screen. That's going to cause some problems with Primack's blue screening ability. Usually this debris would be taken out using a lot of hand tweaking, but Commotion offers several easier ways to address these issues before they become major headaches. One way would be to paint out the debris before you pull the key. So in order to start painting out the debris, let's stop our clip playing and close the clip window and go back into our comp timeline. We're not going to be working at all on our downtown.mov, so let's go ahead and turn the layer off. So let's go to frame 160. Now this is a frame that obviously has some problems with dark blue debris. So let's go select our Eyedropper Tool. And using this tool I can click in the Comp 1 window and click on any pixel within the window. That pixel's color values will be captured in the foreground color box. So let's choose a color right about here. You can see that that color value automatically transferred to this box right here. This will be the color that we're going to use to paint over the debris. Now we'll head up to the Airbrush tool and click within the Comp 1 window using our hotkey and drag our brush size and our brush feather. So now we have a nice big feathered brush. But as you'll notice, the brush icon has a circle with a line through it, indicating that we can't paint on that layer. Now the reason for this is that Commotion includes something called paint layers. Paint layers help organize how you actually paint within a comp. Usually when you're painting in a comp, you only want to be painting on one layer at a time. Now if we didn't have paint layers, we just paint through to all the different layers, which is not what we want to do. So to specify the Mime movie as a paint layer, click in the little box beside the eyeball. A little paintbrush now appears in the box beside the eyeball, now indicating that the Mime movie is the paint layer. Okay, now we're ready to paint on the Mime clip. We're at frame 160, and we'll click in the Comp 1 window and paint nice broad strokes on the Mime clip, being careful not to obscure any of the Mime himself. The irregularities in color that you can see between what I've just painted and the outside blue screen won't really matter because the Primack blue screen keyer will take care of all that. And using the X key, we're going to advance one frame, and to be able to see a little bit better what's going on, let's go and select the Zoom tool. We'll go and drag a rectangle around the area that we want to highlight. Let's go back and select our paintbrush again and continue painting over the dark debris. using the X key, advancing forward a frame, and continuing to do the same throughout the rest of the clip. Okay, now we've reached the end of the Mime clip, so let's zoom back out using the hotkey, and I could actually continue on frames 50 to 159, painting out all the debris in each individual frame. Commotion offers a much more elegant way of taking care of this debris, which I'll show you later. Okay, now that we've prepped the clip, let's go ahead and add a Primack keyer. We'll go to Effects, down to Keying, and select Primack Keyer. Commotion now came up with a dialog box telling us that we're adding an effect to a paint layer. When you make a layer a paint layer, all the effects for that layer are automatically disabled. This is so that you can paint on the layer without seeing any of the effect from any filters that you've applied to the layer. Let's just hit OK and go ahead and turn off the paint layer for the Mime movie. Now that we've disabled the paint layer for the Mime movie so we can actually see what Primack is doing, just a quick overview of the Primack keyer interface. The box that's selected right now is to select the background color. This enables you to tell what general color the keying screen is. In this case it's a blue screen, sometimes it's a green screen or a red screen. Really doesn't make a difference, but this button will allow you to choose that. This button allows you to clean background noise. A lot of times there's some noise due to video compression artifacts or film grain which need to be cleaned out in the process of pulling a key. This button does the same for the foreground. You'll see that when we actually pull a key on the Mime, some of the Mime's clothing will actually show through to the background. We don't want this to happen, and we can rectify this using clean foreground noise. This button is a spill sponge. We'll be using this as well. This cleans out any blue spill, which is reflected light off the blue screen that the Mime is on, and creates a nice color correction effect. This button down below shows you the composite of the Mime. That means that it takes the alpha channel that the keyer has actually created and does the composite and the transparency calculations for you. This button right here shows you the matte for the clip. This button will show you the foreground without any effect done to it, and the button to its right shows you the background, which we have disabled at this moment in time. For the sake of what we're doing right now, let's go back to the composite mode and back to the select background color. Actually, let's go ahead and select the background color. Make sure that the arrow tool is selected. Now we can click and drag a lasso specifying where the background actually is. Voila, I pulled a key. We've now completed the task of selecting the background color, so we're going to go ahead and change from the composite mode to the matte mode. This allows you to see what's going on with the alpha channel of the Mime. In order to see what's better going on, we're going to go click on a Magnified Tool and magnify the Mime. There are a couple of problems with the Mime as it stands just by the default selection of the background color. You can see that his face is showing through, and some of his shirt is showing through, and his shadow on the blue screen is also being filled in with the alpha channel, which we don't want it to be. First of all, let's go fix the shadow problem. We'll click on Clean Background Noise and draw a little lasso around where we think that there should be no alpha channel. Clean it up just like that. Now we're going to go to Clean Foreground Noise and select the areas in his shirt which shouldn't be showing through but currently are. Just do that for multiple areas, making sure that his face and all his shirt is taken care of. And that ends up being pretty good. You can go back and tweak the background noise again to get rid of some of that stuff. So that's pretty much what we want. You can see a few little specks here and there that we'll actually end up getting rid of at a later time. So as soon as we finish color correcting this element with Primack, we'll use another filter to get rid of this junk, and if we go to frame 140, we'll really notice the little specks in the upper right hand corner, which we painted out some of them, but we didn't paint out all of them in every frame. So these will be gotten rid of with that same filter. Since I closed the Primack here window just to see what was going on a little better,
Okay.
I'm going to open up the Mime Movies properties. And under Effects, I'll find Primack here. Just double click on it. And I'll change it back to composite mode. And looking at the clip against the black background, the blue spill from the background blue screen is very apparent, especially on his rear end, on his hat, and kind of on his calves right here. So we'll take care of that using the spill sponge. Just do the same as you've done with the foreground and the background noise. Kind of highlight problem areas. And almost immediately the spill will all go away. Alright, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. Okay, we're done doing the Primack keying, so we'll close the Primack here window. And making sure that we're at frame 140, let's go to Effects, Matte, and Miracle Alpha Cleaner. Now, those specks that we were noticing up in the upper right hand corner disappeared almost immediately. And that's just using the default settings. We'll twirl down the properties for Miracle Alpha Cleaner and scroll down here a little bit. There are a few options, most of which we really don't need to touch. But this one right here is particularly important. Remove specks and fill holes. Now we want to remove specks with what we just did to get rid of the stuff outside of the mime that we really didn't want there. However, we also want to fill some holes, and I'll show you why right now. Viewing just the alpha channel of the mime, we can click on the channel view button a couple times, show the big A. Going back a few frames, it's around frame 115, 113, you can see that there is a little gap in the alpha channel here where there really shouldn't be one. So in order to take care of this, we'll go to Effects, Matte Tools again, and add another Miracle Alpha Cleaner. Okay. Closing up our current Alpha Cleaner and opening up our new one, we can change the Remove Specks to Fill Holes. Making that change instantly removes that hole that existed that we didn't want in the mime. All effects in Commotion can be layered like this to achieve a particular effect. We are now completely done creating a color-corrected, cleaned alpha mime. So we'll collapse the properties and turn on the background downtown movie. We have to change the comp window back to RGB so it can view all the color attributes of the comp. And there is our keyed mime. Just scrubbing through the action a little bit. We can see our mime swimming in midair. Using our hotkey, we'll zoom out. And now we want to composite the ninja. First of all, we want to turn off the My Movie and the Downtown Movie. Let's head over to our project bin, click the ninja movie, and drag it into the timeline. As we've done with everything else in this project, we'll double click on the ninja movie, open it up in a play window, and in the player window, I'm going to click the Load into RAM button. Alright, the clip's now loaded into RAM, play it, and right off the bat, we see a lot of potential problems with this shot. First off, the tip of his head, his legs, and part of his arms are going off of the blue screen. Now, you can't pull a color key out of that, so we're going to have to do what's called rotoscoping. I'll get to that in just a while. Also, the second problem is that his swords are a nice, clean silver. When he swings them around, at times they catch the blue of the blue screen in the background, which makes Primack think that they are actually blue screens, so it pulls a key on them. So we'll use some rotoscoping on that too. In this situation, Commotion provides a very elegant solution, using rotosplines to mask out areas of the clip that can't be keyed and using Primack to mask out areas that can. Let's go up to Windows and select Rotospline, and the Rotospline window opens up. Now, a quick overview of this window. The first thing that you're going to need to know about the Rotospline window has to do with these two buttons. These are the buttons that you use to actually create the initial Rotospline. The red one is to create a natural spline. Natural splines work by averaging out the positions of a bunch of points that you've created. so it creates a very smooth curve between 3 or more points. Next one is called B-Spline. B-Spline actually hits all the points which you create, and unless you tell it to, will create a very jagged mat. This is good for creating mats for edges of buildings and other hard surface objects. Also, I'm going to show you in a little while how to create a curvy mat with it as well. So let's go ahead and create a B-Spline. The Rotospline editor now created path 0 in the Rotospline editor, and also automatically selected the Draw Path tool, which we're going to use to actually draw our Rotospline. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you how to create a quick garbage mat around our Ninja. Just starting to click around the Ninja. Notice that the Rotospline is actually very sharp edged. Now on the next point when I click, I'm going to click and hold down and drag the mouse out. This gives you what's called Bezier Handles, which allow you to control the curvature of the spline you just created. Let's go ahead and finish drawing our garbage mat, and clicking on the first point closes the Rotospline. Dragging the clip window aside and taking a look at the comp window, we can easily see that this mat shape has transferred over into our timeline. But we really don't want to use this mat that I just created because it's very much too crude. I'll go ahead and delete it by clicking on the little trash can in the bottom right hand corner of the Rotospline window. With this demo, we're providing a pre-created set of Rotosplines. We'll load these by going to the Load Save Rotosplines dialog and selecting Load All Paths. And this file is called ninja.spl. Hit open, and a whole bunch of splines have been loaded into the Rotospline window. Now you'll notice that the artist has created one Rotospline for the sleeve and the left foot and the right knee, and pretty much one spline for every single aspect of the ninja's body. A lot of times this is the easiest way to complete a rotoscoping shot. So in order to see what the rotosplines are doing, we'll drag the spline window up and click on play in the player button. Since our frames are still loaded into RAM, the clip still plays back at 30 frames a second. You can see that the rotosplines follow every aspect of the swords and the legs and the tip of the head while it's actually off the mat. Also, the mat itself has been designated with a rotospline just to make sure that Primack doesn't try to key anything outside of the mat itself. Stopping the playback of this clip, just going to quickly go to a frame that utilizes a lot of rotosplines. Like that one's probably a good one. And going back to look at the comp, we're going to click on the Match Comp to Clip button. Now the comp is displaying the same time that the clip is, that's frame 66, and notice that the blue screen is masked out by the rotospline, as are the swords, the foot, and the knee, which are protruding above and beyond the blue screen. Alright, now going back to the clip. Now in this spot there's a lot of motion blur on the ninja's feet and his swords. Going back a frame using the Z key and forward a few frames, his foot is very blurred due to the high rate of motion of his foot. Usually trying to rotoscope out soft edges like this involves a great deal of touch-up work by hand. Commotion makes this a piece of cake. Going back to frame 69, let's click on the Preview button. This gives us a preview of a non-motion blurred rotospline mat, which is obviously not what we want. Now I'm going to hotkey click on the Preview button. This brings up the motion blur settings for our rotosplines. We just want to change the start angle to 270. This is a really common setting for motion blur. So I'm going to go select Sword 1 in the roto palette, and toggling its visibility here, you can see that it's this sword that it's applied to. Also, to its right hand side, we have a motion blur on or off setting. That is off, and this is on. Now we want to shift click on the Preview button to bring up the preview options. In order to view our mat with the appropriate motion blur settings, which we just assigned, we have to click on Motion Blur and hit OK. Let's click on the Preview button again. Now we can see our mat with much more motion blurred edges than we had before. It only took the artist a couple of hours to complete the shot. However daunting rotosplines may look, with a little practice you'll quickly master them. Now that the background is marked out, let's pull the key. We'll close the Ninja clip, go to frame 1 in our player. Now going to go to Effects, Keying, and select the Primack here. Since we're not doing any more rotosplines, I'm going to close the rotospline window, and with the arrow tool selected, I'm going to designate a background color for the Ninja, and changing this to matte mode. And then clean up the foreground noise, which we created a lot of. Go back, grab some of the background stuff. And sometimes you have to go back and forth on this stuff a little bit, so you gotta be patient. Okay, that looks about as good as we're going to get with this stuff. So changing this back to composite mode, we'll use our spill sponge to remove the blue spill on the Ninja that we see. Going up to Effects, Matte, and applying a Miracle Alpha Cleaner to him. Going to twirl down the effects properties for the Ninja and grab the properties for Miracle Alpha Cleaner. Now since we didn't have any specks around the Ninja that we wanted to remove, we're going to go to Fill Holes because we did see actually a couple holes in the Ninja. Also, we may want to increase this number, the connection threshold, to around 30 or even 35. That'll fill in all the holes that it possibly can while still retaining a clean mat. Now going to frame 21, we really notice that keying here is not an option with the swords. We'll have to create a second Ninja layer comprised of just the swords. In order to simplify the process, we're going to render out a separate track mat to mask out everything in the duplicate layer but the swords. In our timeline, we're going to go back up and select the Ninja layer. Now let's double click on the Ninja layer to bring up the clip window again and zoom out. Now we have all our rotosplines available to us again. We'll open up our rotospline window. And since we want a track mat for only the swords, we're going to turn off everything but the swords. In order to do this, we hotkey click on the first eyeball, which will turn off everything down below it. Now we can just go ahead and turn back on the 4 swords that we want. This saves us a lot of time that we don't have to go in and individually turn off the head, the mat, the left hand, and everything down below it. Let's go to frame 28 just to give you a little preview of how the mat will look, and click the preview button. And this is the mat that we're going to get. It's just black and white, the swords with motion blur on them. We've included a track mat ready to go with the tutorial footage. What you want to do if we didn't include this clip is click the render button and render the mat out to disk, then re-import it into the project. From now, just load the swords track mat clip into the project. Before we do that though, we're going to want to turn back on all of our rotosplines because they're affecting our current keyed Ninja. So hotkey click on the head, and that will go ahead and turn all of our rotosplines back on. Let's close our rotospline window and close our clip window. And by double clicking in the empty space in the project bin, it'll bring up import footage. Have the swords mat selected, click open, making sure that we're at frame 1 before we drag the swords mat into the timeline, then going ahead and putting it in below the downtown movie in the timeline. First thing that we can do is turn off the swords layer. This layer is just going to be used as reference for Commotion and is never actually going to show up, so the fact that it's on or off really doesn't matter. We'll double click on the swords movie just to show you what it is before we start playing with it. And we'll load into RAM, click play, And there are our rotoscope swords. So we'll stop the playback of the Swords Matte movie, close the clip window, and now we want to go ahead and duplicate the ninja layer. In order to do that, we'll go select the ninja in the timeline and go to Edit, Duplicate Layers. By doing Edit Duplicate, Commotion created two ninja movies in the timeline. Let's turn off the bottom one and expand the matte properties for the top one. By hotkey clicking on the ninja movie, we can add a track matte. We'll specify the track matte as the Swords Matte.movie and do a luminance matte, which will take the black and white values of the track matte and create an alpha channel from them. Now you can see that only the sword is present. See that the alpha channel of the sword follows exactly what the track matte is specified. I'll go to frame 21, and you can see that the sword doesn't quite look right, and that's because we still have the effects being the Primack here and the Miracle Alpha Cleaner, and hit the delete key and we'll get rid of that. Now there's a huge difference between what we saw before and what we're seeing now with the effects turned off. The blue spill is very, very apparent in the sword. Going forward to frame 22, it's the same, but frame 23 really has the coloration that we want the sword to have in the end. We'll make this happen through a color correction process using Spill Killer and a hue saturation transformation. Now we'll adjust the color of the swords so that they no longer reflect the blue color and have a metal look throughout the entire clip. Let's go to frame 21. And I'm going to go to Effects, Keying, and then Spill Killer Easy. Now we're going to go into the timeline and close our matte properties, expand our effects properties, and then expand the properties for Spill Killer Easy, which we just applied. Now I want to change the screen color from green to blue. This is in order to tell the plugin that it's blue spill that we're trying to remove from the blade of the sword. It's clearly apparent that all of the blue was taken out of the sword. Let me change it back to green, and then blue. It really leaches all that blue out of the sword. Next thing we want to do is to desaturate the sword. I'm going to go up to Effects, Image Control, and Color Balance HLS, which stands for Hue Lightness Saturation. We'll scroll down to the effect that we just applied, expand its properties, and change its saturation to -50. We'll just take some of the green that's in there right now out, and also we'll put the lightness actually up to 20. Give it a little more of a sheen. So now on frames 21, 22, and 23, the color is very uniform over all those frames, which is exactly what we want. We're at frame 21 now, and we're going to go up to the transfer mode for the Ninja movie and change it from normal to lighten. What lighten does is that it actually analyzes the foreground image that you have, in this case our sword, and figures out whether or not the pixels in the sword are brighter than what's behind it. In this case, what's behind it is completely black, so we're not even going to see a difference. But as soon as we turn the background and the ninja on, if the value of the pixel on the sword is brighter than what's behind it, that value will override the background value. However, if it's darker than the background value, the background will show through. So what that kind of does with this sword is it gives it a very metallic sheen, kind of glinty look. Now we'll uncollapse the Ninja movie and turn on the second ninja layer. So now I'm going to turn off the top ninja layer just to show you the effect that we get with the sword, which has been track matted into the shot. Okay. The only thing that's wrong with the ninja right now is that he's facing the wrong way, and we actually want to flip him in the x-axis. So in order to do that, we will go ahead and flip down the properties for the Ninja movie, unlock his scale, and change his X scale instead of 100% to -100%. That changed the horizontal orientation of the sword, and now we'll do the same for the second ninja clip. Collapse its effects, expand its properties, unlock the scale, and change this to -100. So now that I've got the ninja orientated in the way that I want it to be, I want to set his in point at frame 55. I'm going to click on the Expand Contract view, and you'll notice these little dots here at the beginning of the timeline on both the ninja movies. This represents the in point for both of the movies. So we want the in point to actually be on frame 37. So we'll drag the timeline to frame 37 and align the ninja movie endpoints with that frame, like so. Do the same with the second one. So if I go back one frame to frame 36, notice that the ninja disappears. Go back to 37, and every subsequent frame the ninja is still there, which is exactly what we want. So now let's move back to 37, and we actually want to animate the ninja moving across the screen now. So we only need to do that to one of the layers, so let's turn off our swords layer, our top ninja layer, and we're only animating one of the layers because we are going to copy all the positional frames from the one that we're animating to the one that we're not animating, which will create an identical copy in the animation. So I want to expand the properties for the ninja. And I'm going to use the rub text feature by holding the cursor over the word position and moving it in order to move the ninja. And holding on the hotkey, I can actually see him moving in real time. And we want to position the ninja at about 77 in the X and 230 in the Y. So I'm going to move him all the way over here. Click on position again. And 77 in the X and 230 in the Y. So that positions him nicely at the left hand side of the frame. Going to twirl out the timeline view and keyframe that position. You can see a little keyframe appeared right here at frame 37. Now I want to move to frame 118. And I'm going to use the same rub text feature. And holding down the hotkey, I can see the motion. And I want to position him at roughly 786 by 135. Okay, that's good enough. And we can see the red keyframes that have been laid out all across our timeline. And also we can see a new keyframe actually has been added at frame 118 here. And scrubbing through our player here, we can roughly see the motion that the ninja is going through. Now I want to copy these keyframes to the sword layer, or the first ninja layer. I'm going to go down into the timeline and drag a window around the positional keyframes. Go to Edit, Copy. This copies all the positional keyframes from the second ninja movie. Going to collapse this, scroll it up to the first ninja movie, expand its positional properties, and make sure that we're on frame 37, because this is where it's actually going to paste the first keyframe of the keyframes that we just copied. So let's go to Edit, Paste. Expanding the timeline view for the first ninja, we see that the positional keyframes have been dropped exactly into the first ninja's swords, just where they should be. Now both ninja movies, both the sword and the ninja himself, are sharing the same red motion path displayed right here. So they'll move at the exact same rate of speed in the exact same position. You may be wondering why the sword's track mat still worked properly on the ninja clip, even though we flipped the sword's layer horizontally. Basically, the track mat was applied to the clip before the scale was, so the scale happened after the clip had been masked by the track mat. Let's go to frame 78 and turn off both the ninja movies, collapse that one. Let's turn on the Mime. And we're going to move its endpoint to frame 78, like so. Now we're going to uncollapse the Mime movie's properties, close its effects and open up its properties. We want to flip the Mime as well, so we're going to unlock the scale and change this to -100, which will flip it in the horizontal axis. We now want to go to frame 90. And set a keyframe in the position. Using the rubtext feature, I'm going to move the Mime to -1 and 229. By holding down the hotkey again, I can see that real time. Okay, that's pretty much where we want it at right there. That's that. Now I want to go to frame 180. And I'm going to use the rubtext feature with the Mime. And on frame 180, the Mime is going to go to 754 and 263. Okay, now going back through the timeline, we see the Mime moving across our screen. I'm going to turn on everything that we have, except for the swords mat. Okay, scrubbing through this now. The Mime and the Ninja are now flying through the street. But the only problem that we're having is that their color is not quite accurate, and also the Mime is actually floating on top of the building, which it really shouldn't be floating on top of, because we want these characters to appear as if they're huge. So we actually want the Mime to be behind the building. We'll take care of that later. In order to do the color correction and also having the characters go behind the building, I'm going to render out what's called a pre-comp. A pre-comp is going to render the Mime and the Ninja together in the same movie clip with all the effects that we've applied to them, and allow us to apply effects to them both at the same time, as well as roto them both at the same time to make them go behind this building. So I'm going to turn off the downtown clip, and I'm going to go to Composite Settings, and I want to turn on Flow Blur, Motion Blur for this comp, which is by far the better over normal blur. I'm going to leave the quality somewhere in the middle. Hit OK. I want to make sure that Motion Blur is enabled for both my layers. Now I'm going to go to Composite, Render Composite. I want to render all frames, have it be 30 frames a second, have it be full resolution because we don't want to scale it down at all, and have Use Motion Blur checked on. Also, I need to make sure that my channels are RGBA, which stands for red, green, blue, and alpha. That alpha channel is necessary for compositing on top of the background later on. Also, our color is pre-multiplied to black, which is just the way that the alpha channel interacts with the image. Now you just click Render. Click on our Settings button to make sure that it's at millions of colors plus, which means millions of colors plus an alpha channel. And we'll go ahead and name our file precomp.mov and hit save. Now that our pre-comp render is done, we're actually going to go create a new project. So go to File, New Project. In your case, you probably want to save your comp, so we'll click on Save, and up pops a new project. And I'm going to go ahead and double-click in the empty space in the project bin and import the pre-comp movie that I just rendered in, as well as downtown.mov. I'll click on downtown.mov and go to Composite, Make Composite. We'll just create a comp from the downtown.mov clip, and then I'm just going to drag in the pre-comp movie right on top of the downtown movie. Now let's just scrub through this comp that we've created. And there's the Ninja, and there's the Mime. Now the first thing that you'll notice is how much faster this is now than it was in your previous comp. That's because in the pre-comp, all the effects and transformations of our layers were rendered into the comp, so it doesn't have to calculate those anymore. That's also a huge time saver. Let's go to frame 96. And the first thing that we need to do is to color correct the pre-comp to match the background. In order to do this, we'll go to Effects, Color Correct, and Composite Color Matcher. We'll twirl down the pre-comp and the effects for it, and also the Composite Color Matcher, and we'll scroll down and set our target layer to downtown.mov. This tells the color matcher that downtown is a layer which we want to match the color to. Now we're going to go to the Composite Color Matcher dialog box and set target colors to all. This oftentimes yields the best results. And I want to set the strength of my Composite Color Matcher to 75%. The next thing that we want to do is apply a light wrap. In order to do this, we'll go to Effects, Color Correct, and Light Wrap. Alright, let's go down to the timeline, scroll up, and expand the light wrap. We want the background of light wrap to be downtown.mov, and our composite mode to be hard light. What light wrap is actually doing is taking the color and brightness values of the background, blurring them, and spilling them over onto the edges of the characters a little bit. You can see that there's a little blue bleed from the sky onto his arm. If I turn the light wrap off, that disappears. It just brings the characters into the scene a lot more. Just go through a few frames just to make sure that everything's okay. It all looks great. Okay, so now that we've done the color correction and the light wrap for the foreground elements, we need to make them go behind this building. Let's go to frame 36, which is the frame before the ninja appears, and click the downtown movie and go Edit, Duplicate Layers, just like we did before. This creates two downtown movies. I'm going to turn off the pre-comp and the other downtown, and we'll drag the new downtown on top of the pre-comp. Let's double click on the downtown layer, bring it up in its own window, and we're going to go to Windows, Rotospline, to open up the Rotospline editor. Let's create a B-spline. I'm going to draw a fairly simple mat for the edge of this building. I'm going to now go and set the feather of this mat, which is set right here, to 2 pixels. This will give it a little bit of a fuzzy edge, which is slightly more realistic. If we synchronize the time between the clip and the comp, you can see that the building has nicely been cut out right where we want it to be. Okay, going back to our downtown clip, we're going to go to Windows, Motion Tracker. We're going to create a new motion tracker like you learned how to in Lesson 2. Before we hit track, we just have to go down to this one and set our selection range, start frame, to frame 37. Hit OK. I actually want to create 2 new trackers, and these names aren't quite specific enough for what we want, so I'm going to double click on track 0 and name it Center Tracker, and I'm going to double click on track 1 and name it Top Tracker. Now I'll move these trackers to their appropriate places. Top Tracker is going to focus on this top window, and the green tracker, which is Center Tracker, I'm going to position right here. Adjust its size a little bit to suit what we need. Highlighting both of these, I want my subpixel accuracy to be 1/32, and everything else here is fine. So I'm going to hit OK. Now that our motion tracking is done, move this tracker window out of the way. I'll go into the Rotosplines window and make sure Path 1 is highlighted and click Apply Tracker. I want the tracking data to be applied to the entire spline. I'm going to move the path using the Center Tracker, both in the X and the Y position. And for rotation and scale, I don't want to have scale on, but I do want rotation. I want to use the Top Tracker. Hit OK. And now from frame 37 on, the tracker data has been applied to the Rotospline. Now, there's not a lot of movement in the beginning of the shot, but you can see the spline moving. Let's close our motion tracker and Rotospline windows. And also we can close our downtown.mov movie. Now, since this clip really isn't doing anything before frame 37, we'll expand its timeline, go to frame 37, and drag its endpoint to that frame. The ninja and the mime aren't even present before this frame, so that's really why we don't need the downtown movie. Let's go down and turn on the pre-comp movie and the downtown movie so we have everything turned on. We notice that the ninja is actually obscured by the building now, as is the mime. This not only increases the scale of the characters, but also puts them much more in the scene, so to speak. The last thing that we're going to do in this demo is insert a lens flare. First of all, we need to import a clip of pure black. Double-click in the Project Bin window and insert the black frame. Before we insert the black frame into the comp, we'll go ahead and go back to frame 1 so the black frame encompasses the entire duration of the timeline. And before we pull this black clip into the timeline, we want to hotkey click on it and go to Clip Settings. We want to make sure the Commotion imports it with Ignore Alpha. Hit OK. And let's drag the clip into the top layer of the timeline. Okay, now that we have a clip in here, it's actually obscuring everything that's behind it, so we want to change its transfer mode to screen. This is because we're going to add a lens flare to this black layer to represent the sun glinting off of a building up here. We'll go to Effects, Null Light Factory, and Light Factory LE, which is a light edition of the plugin. A bright, warm sun flare has appeared on the wrong spot of the building, but we'll actually go ahead and move it later on. Let's expand the properties and take a look at our options. Twirl down black frame, twirl down effects, and then Null Light Factory LE. We have options for changing the brightness, scale, light source location, which is a position of the lens flare, the color, and a couple other different options, including the flare type. Right now, warm sun flare is exactly what we want. The other two options are location layer and obscuration layer. We won't bother with location layer right now. That actually tracks points within the image to determine the light source location. We want to go ahead and change the obscuration layer. Now, we'll choose that as precomp.mov, which means that whenever the lens flare is obscured by the precomp's alpha channel, the lens flare will disappear just as if it had been a light that was going behind a real object. Now we want to move the lens flare, and by using the rub text and hotkey clicking on light source location, we can move the lens flare in real time. If you remember at the beginning of the clip, we have a slight zoom in, which means that the position of the flare will change slightly. We can use the same track points that we used for the Rotoscoping to automate these changes. Let's go to frame 38. Now going down to my light source location, I can hotkey click on it and select Apply Tracker Data. So we want to create the keyframes from top tracker in the X and the Y position, and we actually don't want absolute point data, because what that's going to do is it's going to take the actual tracker points over by that window that we just tracked and apply those to the lens flare, which will position the lens flare directly on the window that we tracked on the wrong building. Relative to the first tracking point is what we want. It'll take the general motion and apply it to the first initial point of the lens flare that we've already specified. Zooming in here, we can see that the positional data has actually been applied to the lens flare. Now I could actually use the other tracker to change the scale or the brightness of my lens flare, but I don't want to do that right now because it's too small of a change in the motion to even notice. One thing I do want to do, however, is change my brightness. Change it to 125, should be good. I'm going to take the scale down to 0.6. That reduces the brightness a little bit, but upping the brightness and reducing the scale actually gives the lens flare a softer glow. So when it passes behind the ninja and the mime, it'll actually fade in and out at a smoother rate. Now we have the lens flare glinting off the building, the mime, and the ninja flying through the clip. To complete the shot, we'll add some shadows to the ground. This is where you take what you've learned in this tutorial and try some problem solving. To complete the shot, we need to put some shadows in the scene. Because the character is passed in front of buildings that are different distances away from them, we'll need to use the different layers to simulate the different planes upon which the shadows are cast. This will give the shot a nice sense of three-dimensional depth. There's really no right or wrong way to do the shadows, it's completely up to you. If you get stuck, refer to the completed project file on the tutorial CD. This is what your final shot should end up looking like. This concludes the Lesson 3 demo.